So we'll now move to Miss Robin K. Wiener. And Miss Robin K. Wiener is from US. She is the president of the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, very well known, ISRI, ISRI, in Washington, DC. And Ms. Rabin leads the organization, which is virtually the voice of the global recycling industries. And it promotes safe, economically sustainable, and environmentally responsible recycling through networking, advocacy, and education. So there is a huge amount of education advocacy part and networking part to develop the processes around the world. Mr. Rabin.
It's a good start on World Environment Day. So I appreciate very much the invitation to join you and to be part of this very important panel. So thank you very much. And I also just want to start by offering my prayers and wishes for good health for all the people of India and around the world, and for hopefully a rapid conclusion to the global pandemic that we're all unfortunately suffering through. Let me start, if I could, by telling you just very quickly a little bit about Israel. Professor Chowdhury, you've done a very good job already of sharing who we are. We are the trade association based in Washington, representing the recyclers, those who are processing, brokering, and consuming the range of what we call the traditional recyclable materials. So metals, paper, plastics, rubber, textiles, electronics, and glass in North America and around the world. What I want to focus on is recycling's role in global sustainability. Recycling has a very unique role in achieving sustainability. I think it's one of the very few industries and activities that brings together the three key elements of sustainability in terms of protection of the environment and contributions to the environment, sustainable economic growth, as well as societal benefit in terms of helping support livelihoods of people around the world. If we focus first on the environmental benefits of recycling, and these are ones that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, manufacturing products with recycled materials results in significant energy savings compared to manufacturing with virgin materials, reducing greenhouse gases, helping in the fight against climate change. In the US alone, recyclers are responsible for transforming more than 130 million metric tons of material from outdated, obsolete, or industrial products into valuable manufacturing inputs. Also, by using recyclable commodities, we reduce the need to mine for ore, cut down trees for paper, extract fossil fuels to produce plastics, and otherwise deplete our natural resources. And certainly it also reduces the amount of material sent to landfills, helping to repair the world and preserve the land for better uses. The recycling industry is also essential to global economic development. It's estimated that the annual turnover of recycling globally is approximately $500 billion annually, and it employs well over 20 million people worldwide. In terms of the amount of material that is handled worldwide and processed worldwide, the latest figures I've seen have shown that there's nearly 1 billion metric tons of recyclable material across all the commodities I mentioned that are recycled throughout the world. And about 20% of that actually moves across borders because recycling is demand driven. So wherever the material is needed is where it travels to, whether it's a steel mill, a paper mill in Delhi, in Chicago, in Shanghai, in South America, wherever it's needed, that's where the material flows. Within the US, it's estimated that recycling contributes about $117 billion annually in economic activity. And we employ directly more than 160,000 people full-time in the industry, but when you factor in all the indirect jobs that are supported, we are almost 500,000 people that are supported through the industry in the US. It's hard these days to talk about any subject without recognizing the impact that COVID has had on the economy and on the industries and on the economy worldwide. One of the positive, and I hate to say positive with all the suffering that is occurring, but what it has enabled is a recognition of the important role that recycling plays in terms of the global manufacturing supply chain. As a matter of fact, early on in the pandemic, in March of 2020, March of last year, our Department of Homeland Security here in the US actually declared recycling essential based on its critical role as the first link in the manufacturing supply chain for a lot of the products that are actually used to fight the pandemic, for tissues, for PPE, for constructing hospitals and hospital beds, et cetera. So although certainly you can see from this slide that recycling supplies feedstock for a broad range of industries and almost every segment of the economy. The focus certainly early on was on those related to COVID. However, currently it is estimated that recyclable materials and recycled commodities, and they are commodities, these are specification grade materials that are supplying manufacturing feedstock for more than 40% of the world's industrial raw material needs. When you look at individual commodities, it can vary as high as more than 90% for some commodities and a little bit less for others. But the average overall is 40%. As a matter of fact, I should mention that in the US, the US steel industry relies on ferrous scrap actually as the single largest raw material input for the industry here. We're also finding that aluminum products are increasingly dependent upon by manufacturers in the US because of their energy and cost savings. And copper as well, and actually copper has the added benefit of its antimicrobial properties. We're talking today about best practices as well as innovation. And when I think of best practices, I think what are those practices that help make sure that recycling is responsible and successful? So what makes for successful recycling? And certainly there are a range of factors, but when I think of what the primary factors are, the primary elements to contribute to successful recycling, one of them is education. It's educating consumers about what can be recycled and what can't. We refer in the US as to what can go into the bin and what can't. There's a lot of confusion out there, especially as packaging materials get more complex. And so it's very important that we raise awareness about recycling and what is able to be recycled and what's not. A quality supply stream is extremely critical. We need to help make sure that what enters the recycling stream is of the highest quality possible to ensure that we can produce high quality commodity grade recyclables at the end of the process. We need access to markets. As I've mentioned, about 20% of what is recycled throughout the world actually crosses borders each and every day. And that's because they're global markets for recyclable materials. So while we do all we can in our own countries to ensure that we meet the domestic needs of our manufacturers, there is enough material that the material travels to manufacturers around the world. And so we need that market access. And certainly innovation and investment, continued innovation and investment are critical for successful recycling. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But there are also two other key elements I want to make sure that we talk about today, especially with the audience we have today, which is so diverse in terms of geography, but also in terms of the different segments and parts of industry, manufacturing, economy, academia, policymakers, et cetera, that we have on this webinar today. It's incredibly important, and we have found this more true over the last couple of years, that a collaboration occurs between all parts of the chain, that manufacturers are talking to recyclers, are talking to policymakers to ensure that we have the best results possible and the most successful recycling that we can achieve. It's also critical that we create clear distinctions in policy between recycling activities and waste management activities. Those are two distinct activities and two distinct segments of the economy. One results in material returning into and is part of the circular economy, whereas the other ends with disposal. And so they need to be regulated as such. They're regulated differently, and the considerations are different. And the same is true for distinguishing between what is a recyclable material and what is a waste material. Very different, requiring very different processes, very different controls, and very different policies. And I'm pleased that in the US, we've made great strides in this area. And I know that there have been successes in other parts of the world. But I wanted to mention this as I know that in India, there is a great focus on developing a national recycling policy. And I've been very impressed by and working very closely with our colleagues at MRAI and Mr. Sanjay Mehta and all of his colleagues about the progress that's being made to create responsible recycling within India. And so, but I'm envious of the fact that you're at the beginning of that process. And so I have an opportunity to take best practices from around the world. And again, one of those best practices is those distinctions between recycling and waste management, recyclables, and waste materials. So let's talk for a minute about recycling innovation. Now, while the recycling industry is constantly evolving, the last 10 years has seen significant innovations in recycling technologies and processes. And I feel very fortunate because I have been with ISRI and involved in the industry for more than 30 years. And it's remarkable the rapid change that's occurring in the industry just over the last 10 years. I haven't seen any sort of rapid development like this in the previous 20 years, certainly, that I have been involved with the industry. A lot of the focus has been on what we'll call the sorting and the methods for basically increasing the recyclability, increasing the yield of valuable material during recycling, and optimizing recyclability of products. So for example, in shredding, shredding refers to automobile shredding. So it's a practice that's used throughout the US and in many parts of the world as the most effective way for recovering the commodity grade materials out of the automobiles. And we're seeing significant advances in what we call downstream sorting and separation through technologies such as eddy currents, tumblers, and additional technologies which bring the purity levels up to 95% plus. There's also been advances in computer-guided sensor technology, and that's not just in shredding, but for plastics. We've already talked, our previous speaker talked about plastics. This is an area where we've seen significant developments, and the technologies that are being applied are near infrared technologies, induction, X-ray, optical, 2D, 3D. There's a lot of constantly evolving technologies that allow us to separate different polymers and increase our yield and get cleaner material. There have been significant evolution in the controls that are being used within the processing of recyclables to ensure responsible and environmentally responsible processing to control emissions and pollution. There's also use of advanced information technology to allow for precise measurement, record keeping, and remote monitoring. So wherever we are in the world, we can watch what's happening within the equipment to make sure that it's running well and that there are no issues that are occurring to prevent, again, responsible recycling. We're seeing more and more use of robotics here in the US, especially when it comes to what we call the residential side, for the residential stream, which is probably about 20% of the recycling stream in the US, and more use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. As a matter of fact, yesterday I was on a call with one of our members who is in the business of robotics and artificial intelligence, and he was sharing with me some of the newest innovations and technology that they're doing and the research they're doing to further improve on even what we can do today. And it's very exciting. Also, one of the other areas that's very exciting is we're seeing barcodes starting to be seen on consumer packaging so that we have more accurate recyclability of plastics, and we can really be clear what can go into the stream and what can't. And what I'm really very excited about is the possibility of digital watermarks, which used with machine learning and artificial intelligence will allow us to create a stream that is of highest quality and as few contaminants as possible, and will hopefully also allow us to increase what can even go into the stream.